Imagine waking up to the sound of sirens, only to step outside and see police officers standing by your barn, hands on their belts like they're about to break up a hostage situation. But the so-called criminals in question? My chickens. Apparently, someone had reported my farm animals as a public menace. That someone, my entitled neighbor, Karen. What started as a ridiculous complaint quickly spiraled into an unbelievable series of events that ended with Karen herself being the one in handcuffs. But let me take you back to where it all began. A few years ago, I traded in the chaos of city life for something quieter. I bought a few acres of land just outside a small town, built myself a cozy farmhouse, and set up a little homestead with chickens, goats, and my favorite rescue animal, Carl the donkey. It was peaceful. No honking traffic, no concrete jungle, just open land, fresh air, and the satisfying clucking of my chickens each morning. It was perfect. What I didn't know, however, was that trouble lurked just beyond my property line. See, a half-mile down the road, there was a gated community run by one of the most notoriously power-hungry HOAs in the state, the kind of HOA that would fine you for having a slightly different shade of beige on your mailbox. And within the community lived the queen of entitlement herself, Karen. Now, Karen wasn't just your run-of-the-mill HOA busybody. She believed that her influence extended far beyond the HOA's jurisdiction. In her mind, she didn't just rule her little neighborhood. She ruled everything within a 5-mile radius. That included me, apparently. The first time I met her was a disaster waiting to happen. It was a bright Sunday morning, and I was out feeding my animals when I noticed a woman marching across my property like she was on some sort of mission. No knock, no introduction, just an angry woman in a designer tracksuit stomping towards me like I had personally offended her existence. You? She barked, stopping a few feet away from my goat pen. These need to go. I blinked at her, confused. Excuse me. She jabbed a manicured finger toward my animals. All of them. The chickens, the goats, that hideous donkey. They're an eyesore, and they stink. You need to remove them immediately. I had to bite my cheek to keep from laughing. Ma'am, this is a farm. That's kind of what farms have, she scoffed, looking me up and down like I was a speck of dirt on her overpriced sneakers. This land is too close to our community. The HOA has strict guidelines about property appearance, and this is unacceptable. Now, I'd heard about overreaching HOAs before, but this was next level. I don't live in your HOA, I pointed out, folding my arms. Your rules don't apply to me. Karen's face twisted into a smug smirk. Oh, they do. This entire area falls under our influence, and we simply cannot have livestock lowering property values. I raised an eyebrow. So, you moved next to a farm, and now want to get rid of the farm? She huffed. That's beside the point. You need to comply, or we'll take action. I laughed. I genuinely thought she was joking. Yeah, good luck with that. Karen's face turned redder than a ripe tomato. You'll regret this, she hissed before turning on her heel and storming off. At first, I brushed it off as an empty threat, but then the letters started coming. They were slipped into my mailbox, official-looking notices with the HOA's letterhead claiming I was violating community guidelines. They listed fines, demands for removal of my animals, and even threats of legal action. At first, I thought maybe this was just some mass mailing mistake, but then I realized they were only addressed to me. Curious, I called the county office to check if my land was somehow under HOA control. The answer? A resounding no. My property was completely independent of their rules. So, I decided to do a little digging. I took one of the letters to a lawyer friend of mine, who took one look at them and burst out laughing. This isn't even real, he said, pointing to the signature at the bottom. No official seal, no legal backing. She's making this up. Karen had faked an official HOA violation letter. At this point, I could have ignored her, but something told me she wasn't going to stop. And I was right, because the very next week, the county inspector showed up at my gate. Apparently, someone had filed multiple complaints against me. The claims? That my animals were a health hazard, that I was running an illegal farm, and that I was endangering the community. The inspector, a middle-aged guy named Ray, looked around my property and let out a low whistle. Yeah, this is one of the cleanest small farms I've ever seen. I sighed. Let me guess, you got a complaint from a lady named Karen? Ray snorted. She's been calling nonstop. We figured we'd check, but honestly, this is a waste of time. After a quick walk around, Ray gave me a thumbs up and left, telling me not to worry. But of course, Karen wasn't done. The next escalation? Security footage. At this point, I decided to install cameras around my property just to see what was really going on. And sure enough, It didn't take long before I caught her in the act. The footage showed Karen sneaking onto my land at night, dumping trash near my fence. The next day, she'd take photos of the mess and use them as evidence for her complaints. I was livid. I printed out still images from the video and marched right over to the police station. The officer at the front desk listened to my story, took one look at the footage, and let out a low whistle. "That's trespassing and illegal dumping," he said. "We'll have a word with her." But even after the police visited her, Karen didn't stop. She just got sneakier. It was one thing for her to file fake complaints. It was another thing entirely when she called the police on my animals. One morning, just as I was finishing up feeding Carl, a pair of police cars rolled up my driveway. 2 officers stepped out, one resting his hand on his belt as he approached me. "Sir, we got a report about some aggressive animals." The officer looked around, clearly confused. The only aggressive thing on my property was Carl, who was currently rolling in the dirt like an overgrown dog. I let out a sigh. "Let me guess. Karen." The officer exchanged a glance with his partner. "A woman did call, claimed there were dangerous animals threatening the community." I pointed toward my animals. The chickens pecked lazily at the ground. The goats chewed on grass. Carl let out a loud bray before flopping onto his side for a nap. The officer pursed his lips. "Yeah, this doesn't look like a public menace." I shook my head. "Check my security cameras. She's been making false reports." After reviewing the footage, the officers weren't just amused, they were annoyed. Filing a false police report, that's illegal. And this was just the beginning because Karen's desperation was about to push her into felony territory. The moment I realized Karen was forging fake HOA violation letters, I knew this wasn't just some overzealous neighbor with too much time on her hands. This was an obsession. And like any good obsession, it wasn't going to stop until it reached a breaking point. At first, the letters were almost laughable, typed in a stiff, overly formal tone. They detailed my alleged violations and demanded immediate action. The first one claimed I was operating an unregistered agricultural facility and that my livestock had to be removed within 30 days or I would face fines of up to $500 per day. The second letter accused me of creating an environmental hazard due to animal waste and alleged that multiple complaints had been filed about the smell. That one actually made me chuckle. My farm was clean, and my nearest neighbors, other than Karen's gated community, never had an issue. In fact, one of them, old Mr. Henderson, had a cow that could probably be smelled from the next county, and nobody cared. The third letter took things even further, claiming my property was an unpermitted petting zoo and that I was breaking commercial zoning laws. At that point, it was so ridiculous I decided to entertain myself by keeping them in a folder labeled Karen's Greatest Hits. Then the complaints started. At first, it was just minor things. An inspector from the county's zoning office showed up one afternoon, clipboard in hand, looking around my property. "Just need to do a routine check," he said. "We got a complaint about an unauthorized farm operation." I raised an eyebrow. "And who exactly made this complaint?" He smirked, already knowing. "Wouldn't say a name, but let's just say we've had some repeat reporters from that HOA down the road." We both knew who it was. I let him do his inspection, and of course, everything was fine. He shook my hand and told me not to worry. "We deal with people like this all the time," he assured me. "We're not shutting down a legally operating farm because someone doesn't like chickens." I thought that would be the end of it, but I had underestimated Karen's level of crazy. Over the next few weeks, I was hit with a wave of complaints. The health department came out after an anonymous report claimed I was running an unlicensed animal shelter and that my animals were sickly and mistreated. That, of course, was a lie. The inspector took one look at my well-fed, happy animals and practically rolled his eyes. Then, a noise complaint was filed about my rooster. Now, I won't pretend my rooster, Cluck Norris, was the quietest creature in the world, but we were in a rural area, and roosters crowing at sunrise was hardly a crime. I had a friendly conversation with the local sheriff's office, and they assured me no action would be taken. But it didn't stop there. Karen, realizing that her official complaints weren't working, got more creative. One morning, I found trash scattered along the edge of my fence. Rotting food, plastic wrappers, even some broken glass. It was strange, but I figured maybe some wild animals had knocked over a bin somewhere, and the wind had carried it onto my land. So I cleaned it up. But then the next week, it happened again, and this time it wasn't just trash. There were old pieces of raw meat thrown into my goat pen. That was deliberate. Someone had planted the mess. At that point, I knew I had to catch the culprit, So I installed motion-activated security cameras along the edge of my property. The very next night, bingo. The footage was clear as day. Karen sneaking onto my land at 2 a.m., carrying a garbage bag. She walked right up to my fence, dumped the trash, then took out her phone and snapped pictures of the mess before scurrying off like a raccoon caught in a spotlight. It was the smoking gun I needed. The next morning, I printed out several screenshots and took them straight to the police station. The officer at the front desk took one look at the pictures and let out a low whistle. Wow, she's really got it out for you, huh? I nodded. I want to file a formal complaint for trespassing and illegal dumping. The officer agreed, but there was a problem. Since she hadn't actually damaged anything, the charge wasn't enough to do much beyond a stern warning. We can go talk to her, he said, but if she denies it, it's just your word against hers. That wasn't the answer I wanted, but I was patient. I knew Karen would slip up again. Sure enough, the next morning, I woke up to see 3 patrol cars parked outside my barn. At first, I panicked. Had something happened to one of my animals? Had there been an accident? But as I got closer, I realized the officers weren't looking at my barn. They were talking to Karen. Karen, who was standing in my driveway, arms crossed, smirking like she had just won the lottery. One of the officers turned to me. Sir, this woman reported that your animals are posing a public safety threat and that you are running an illegal farming operation. I blinked. A public safety threat? They're chickens. Karen scoffed. Not just chickens. That donkey is aggressive, and your animals are running loose. They were on my property this morning. That was a flat-out lie. My fences were secure, and Carl the donkey had never even left the property. I turned to the officer. Check my security footage. I have cameras. Karen's smirk faltered. The officers followed me inside while I pulled up the video feed on my laptop. Every second of the morning was accounted for. My animals hadn't left my property. The officers watched as Karen's smug expression faded into panic. So, you lied? The officer said slowly, turning to Karen. You made a false police report? Karen sputtered. I was just mistaken. Maybe I saw different animals. But the cops weren't buying it. Filing a false police report is a crime, and Karen had just wasted police resources. The officers pulled her aside for questioning while I stood back, arms crossed, watching the show. After a few minutes, they informed her that she would be receiving a formal warning. If she did it again, she'd be arrested. Karen stormed off, furious, and I thought that maybe, just maybe, she'd learned her lesson. But no, because Karen wasn't just petty, she was vindictive, and she was about to take things way too far. The first time Karen called the police on my animals, I thought it was a joke. The second time, I realized she was actually unhinged. The third time, well, that's when things took a turn no one, especially Karen, saw coming. It all started on a quiet morning, just after sunrise. I was out feeding my animals, enjoying the fresh air, when I heard a car pull up my driveway. Now, I wasn't expecting visitors, so when I turned around and saw 2 police cruisers, my stomach dropped. 2 officers stepped out, their expressions a mix of confusion and mild irritation. Morning, sir, the taller one said. We got a report about aggressive animals running loose. I blinked. Aggressive? Running loose? My goats were munching hay. My chickens were pecking the ground. And Carl the donkey was sprawled out in the sun, living his best life. I think you've been misinformed, I said, gesturing to my very much not aggressive animals. The second officer sighed, pulling out his notepad. A woman named Karen from the HOA down the road called in. Said your donkey was chasing people and your chickens were swarming onto private property. At that exact moment, Carl let out the world's most pathetic yawn and flopped onto his side, kicking a lazy hoof in the air. I raised an eyebrow. Does he look like he's attacking anyone? The officers exchanged glances. Not really. I sighed, rubbing my temples. She's been making false complaints for weeks now. You want to see the security footage? That caught their interest. You have security cameras? Installed them after she started sneaking onto my property to dump trash? I said, leading them inside to my monitor. I pulled up the morning's footage, scrolling through until I found the key moment. There, clear as day, was Karen standing at the edge of my property with her phone out, pointing at my animals like she was trying to make them do something incriminating. But the best part? The very next clip showed Karen throwing breadcrumbs toward my fence, clearly trying to lure my chickens closer. The officer watching the screen groaned. You've got to be kidding me. I smirked. Oh, it gets better. I pulled up footage from a few days before. Karen standing outside my fence, screaming at Carl to do something aggressive. Carl, being the saint that he is, simply stared at her, blinked, then turned around and pooped right in front of her. The officers lost it. One actually had to step away, hands on his knees, laughing so hard he was wheezing. After they calmed down, the taller officer shook his head. All right, this is textbook false reporting. The other officer nodded. We're going to have a word with her. If she does this again, she could be facing charges. That sounded promising, but I wasn't holding my breath. Karen had proven she was relentless, and I had a sinking feeling she wasn't going to back down. And I was right, because the very next day, she escalated in the dumbest way possible. I was out fixing a fence when I saw, once again, red and blue lights flashing in my driveway. Not just one, not two, but 3 police cruisers. And this time, animal control was with them. I dropped my tools and jogged over, heart pounding. Okay, what now? One of the officers, clearly frustrated, sighed. We got another complaint. I didn't even need to ask from who. Let me guess. Karen. The officer nodded. She's claiming your animals are malnourished, neglected, and a danger to the community. Before I could even respond, Carl the donkey trotted up to the officer and nudged his arm, begging for scratches. The officer just stared at him, then turned back to me. This is Carl. Yep. Real menace to society, huh? One of the animal control officers checked over my animals while I stood by, arms crossed. Less than 10 minutes later, she came back and shook her head. There's nothing wrong with these animals, she said. They're well-fed, healthy, and happy. I turned to the officers. So, does this count as another false report? The lead cop nodded. Yeah, and this time we're not just giving her a warning. That was music to my ears. Just as they were wrapping up, who else but Karen herself came stomping down the road toward my property, waving her phone like it was some kind of weapon. I knew it, she shrieked. You bribed them. I demand they take those animals away. One of the officers turned to her, stone-faced. Ma'am, you filed a false police report again. You're wasting county resources. Karen's face turned an alarming shade of red. False. I have video proof of that monstrosity attacking people. Everyone turned to look at Carl, who was now lying on his back, kicking his legs in the air like an oversized puppy. The silence was deafening. Finally, the officer pinched the bridge of his nose. Ma'am, turn around. Karen froze. What? You're under arrest for filing a false police report and harassment. Her jaw dropped. No, you can't. I'm the victim. I watched, absolutely delighted, as they cuffed Karen right there in my driveway. As they led her to the squad car, she screeched, I'll sue you. I'll get every animal off this land. This isn't over. One of the officers turned back to me and smirked. If she tries anything else, just let us know. I grinned. Oh, don't worry. I'll have my cameras ready. As they drove away, Carl let out a loud, triumphant bray. It was the most satisfying sound I'd ever heard. But little did I know, Karen wasn't done yet, because what she did next took this to a whole new level. After Karen's dramatic arrest for filing false police reports, I thought, hoped, she'd finally take the hint and leave me and my animals alone. But no, Karen wasn't just entitled, she was vengeful. And her next move? It was pure insanity. It all started on a quiet Sunday afternoon. I was inside, enjoying a rare moment of peace, when my phone rang. It was my neighbor Hank, who lived just up the road. Hank was an old-school farmer, not one for gossip, but his voice was frantic. Get down to your barn right now. Some crazy woman is trying to load your donkey into a damn SUV. I nearly dropped my phone. What? She's got some guy with her. They're trying to shove that big old donkey of yours into the back of their car. I didn't even waste time responding. I sprinted outside, jumped in my truck, and tore down the dirt path toward my barn. My heart was pounding. I had no idea what I was about to walk into. As I got closer, I spotted the scene, and it was even more ridiculous than I imagined. Karen, dressed in another one of her overpriced tracksuits, was waving her arms and shrieking orders at some poor, clueless man who I assumed was her husband. He was frantically pulling on Carl's lead rope, trying and failing to convince my donkey to move toward their SUV, which was packed up right against my fence. Carl, being the absolute legend that he is, stood his ground like a statue. His expression was the donkey equivalent of, "Are you serious right now?" I slammed on my brakes so hard that my truck skidded. Before it had even fully stopped, I jumped out, furious. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Karen whirled around, eyes wide. But instead of looking guilty, she looked indignant. "We're rescuing this poor, neglected animal," she snapped, as if I was the crazy one. I stared at her, completely dumbfounded. "Rescuing? This is my donkey. You are literally stealing him." Her husband, who looked like he deeply regretted every life decision that led him to this moment, mumbled, "Karen, maybe we should." "No." Karen cut him off. She jabbed a finger at me. I called animal control and the authorities on you. No one is coming to help. They're probably in your pocket. I had to take matters into my own hands. I was so shocked I almost laughed. Almost. Let me get this straight, I said, taking a step closer. You got arrested for filing false reports. You were told to leave me alone, and your response was to come onto my property in broad daylight and try to kidnap my donkey. Karen's eye twitched. It's not kidnapping if the animal wants to be saved. At that exact moment, Carl, the supposed abused donkey, let out a loud, obnoxious bray, yawned, and flopped onto the ground like a giant dog. I gestured at him. Does he look like he wants to be saved? Karen's face twisted with rage. You're lying, she screamed. This is animal cruelty. These creatures shouldn't be forced to live outside. I blinked. Karen, he's a donkey. Just when I thought things couldn't get more absurd, Karen lunged forward, grabbed Carl's lead rope, and tried to drag him toward the SUV. Carl, having the patience of a saint, did not move. Not an inch. Instead, he blinked at her. Then, with the pure, majestic power only a donkey possesses, he suddenly yanked his head back, ripping the rope straight out of her hand. The force of it sent Karen stumbling backward, directly into a pile of fresh manure. Splat. Silence. Her husband went pale. Hank, who had been watching from his truck, howled with laughter. And me? I just stood there, arms crossed, trying to decide whether I should be furious or just let nature take its course. Karen sat there, stunned, covered in donkey crap, shaking with rage. And then, like clockwork, she snapped. I'm suing you for endangering me. I exhaled slowly. Karen, you trespassed. You tried to steal my donkey, and you fell into manure because you were being an idiot. She opened her mouth, probably to scream some more, but before she could, the universe decided to truly humble her. Because that's when the police sirens blared. One of the officers from before, Officer Ramirez, stepped out of the squad car, hands on his hips, looking beyond done with life. What the hell is happening now, he muttered. Before I could answer, Karen sprang to her feet, or at least she tried to. Her foot slipped in the manure, and she face-planted again. By this point, even the officer was laughing. Karen, now completely filthy and seething with rage, scrambled up and pointed at me. He attacked me. His animal attacked me. Ramirez just stared at her, then at me, then at Carl, who was now licking a salt block, completely unbothered. Ma'am, he said slowly, I have had it with you. Karen froze. The officer turned to me. Do you want to press charges for attempted theft and trespassing? I didn't hesitate. Absolutely. Karen's face went ghost white. No, you can't do that. I was trying to help. Ramirez sighed, waving her husband over. Sir, if you have any sense, I'd suggest convincing your wife to stop harassing this man before she gets into even more legal trouble. Her husband, who looked about a minute away from changing his name and moving to another country, nodded frantically. Yes, officer. I'm so sorry. We'll leave right now. Karen opened her mouth, but before she could say another word, her husband grabbed her arm and practically dragged her away. As they scrambled back into their SUV and sped off, Ramirez turned back to me and shook his head. She's got some serious issues, he muttered. I laughed. You're just now figuring that out? Ramirez chuckled, then sighed. We'll file the report. If she shows up again, let us know immediately. Next time, she's going straight to jail. I nodded, feeling the weight finally start to lift. Thanks, officer. As the police car drove away, I looked down at Carl, who was happily munching on some hay, completely unbothered by the madness that had just unfolded. I patted his back. Good job, buddy. You really dodged a bullet there. Carl brayed, and with that, I walked back to my house, finally feeling like Karen had truly outdone herself. But little did I know, she still wasn't done. After Karen's spectacular failure at donkey theft, I hoped, she would finally accept defeat. I mean, she had been arrested, publicly humiliated, and literally face-planted into manure. Any rational person would have cut their losses and moved on. But Karen? Oh no, she doubled down. Because when entitled people don't get their way, they don't reflect, they plot revenge. And Karen's next move? It was her boldest, most illegal, and most self-destructive stunt yet. It started a week after the great donkey debacle. Things had been quiet, too quiet. I hadn't seen Karen lurking around. No mysterious complaints had been filed. Even my security cameras hadn't picked up anything suspicious. It should have been a relief. It wasn't. Because the thing about Karen? She was like a storm, the kind that's eerily silent right before it destroys everything in its path. And sure enough, One morning, as I stepped outside to feed the animals, I was hit with the worst smell imaginable: rotting garbage. Not just one bag, dozens, piled up against my fence, leaking mystery fluids, attracting flies, and God knows what else. I gagged. My first thought was wild animals. Maybe some raccoons had gone on a rampage. But then I spotted something that made my stomach drop. A handwritten sign stuck to one of the garbage bags, in bold red marker. HOA declares this farm a health hazard. Shut it down. Oh, hell no. I stormed back inside, pulled up my security footage, and sure enough, there she was. Karen, caught in 4K, sneaking onto my property in the middle of the night, hauling garbage bags from her car and deliberately dumping them along my fence. Even better, she wasn't alone. Karen had recruited 2 other HOA board members, one of whom was actually filming the whole thing on his phone like they were documenting some heroic act of justice. Unbelievable. I grabbed my keys and drove straight to the police station. Officer Ramirez nearly spit out his coffee when he saw the footage. "Oh, she's lost it," he muttered, shaking his head. I folded my arms. "I want to press charges. All of them." Ramirez didn't even hesitate. "Good. Because this is illegal dumping, harassment, trespassing, and conspiracy." He wasted no time filing the charges. But the best part? Ramirez told me that this wasn't her first offense. Apparently, Karen had a history of pulling stunts like this. She had been involved in multiple HOA lawsuits for harassing homeowners, enforcing fake fines, and even threatening people into selling their homes so she could keep the neighborhood aesthetic. But this time, she had finally pushed too far. Because illegal dumping? That was a serious offense, especially when it involved deliberately framing someone for a health violation. I left the station knowing that Karen was in deep, deep trouble. Sure enough, later that afternoon, the police showed up at Karen's house. And from what I heard, she did not handle it well. According to one of my neighbors, Karen threw a full-blown tantrum on her front lawn, screaming about corruption and a conspiracy against her. She even tried to call the HOA president to bail her out. That didn't go well. Because the HOA? They weren't stupid. The second they realized Karen was about to be publicly arrested, they did what HOAs do best: they cut her loose. Within hours, the HOA released an official statement distancing themselves from her, claiming she had acted alone and that they had never authorized her actions. Translation: "We know she's guilty, and we don't want to get sued." And then came the best part. Karen was arrested, in her driveway, in broad daylight, with half the neighborhood watching. Handcuffed, screaming, and according to one witness, she actually tried to bite one of the officers. That earned her an extra charge of assaulting an officer. Her husband didn't even bother trying to stop them. He just stood there looking like a man who had finally accepted that his wife was an unhinged lunatic. The aftermath? Oh, it was delicious. Karen was charged with trespassing, illegal dumping, filing false reports, harassment, attempted theft, Carl the donkey says hi, and assaulting an officer. That last charge, a felony, which meant Karen wasn't just facing fines. She was looking at actual jail time. And to top it all off, the HOA banned her from ever serving on the board again, which, to Karen, was worse than jail. She was officially dethroned, her power gone, her reputation ruined, and her husband filed for divorce. Turns out, getting arrested for donkey theft and conspiracy was his final straw. As for me, well, I celebrated. I threw a farm appreciation day, invited the whole town, set up a petting zoo, and even made t-shirts that said "Justice for Carl." People loved it. Even the local news picked up the story. And Karen? She moved away in shame, which meant, for the first time in months, I could finally enjoy my farm in peace. No fake violations, no cops at my door, no attempted donkey heist. Just me, my animals, and a gloriously Karen-free life. The end. Well, unless she tries to break out of jail and steal my goat next. But that's a story for another day. After Karen's spectacular downfall, life on my farm finally settled into the peaceful routine I had originally envisioned. No more fake violation letters, no more ridiculous police reports, and thankfully, no more attempted donkey theft. But Karen's exit from my life wasn't just satisfying. It was absolutely humiliating for her in ways she never saw coming. The days after her arrest were glorious. Word spread fast. This wasn't just the neighborhood scandal. It had gone local viral. Between the donkey napping incident, the fake HOA violations, and the illegal dumping scheme, people couldn't stop talking about it. The local news station even ran a segment about it, dubbing the incident, "HOA Tyrant Caught Red-Handed. A Small Town Farm Stands Its Ground." I wasn't going to talk to the press, But when I saw the story was blowing up anyway, I figured, why not? The reporter came out to my farm, and I gave them a full tour, letting them meet Carl the donkey, who, by the way, loved the attention. They asked me how I managed to deal with Karen for so long without losing my mind, and I just smiled and said, patience and security cameras. When the interview aired, the best part was the footage. They showed clips of Karen dumping trash in the dead of night, trying to lure my chickens, and even getting dragged away in handcuffs while screaming about HOA jurisdiction. It was priceless. The HOA, desperate to save face, completely disowned Karen. At the next HOA meeting, they released a statement officially banning her from ever serving on the board again. They claimed she had acted without their authorization, that they had never approved of her actions, and that they would never condone illegal behavior. Translation: we don't want to get sued, so we're throwing Karen under the bus. And it worked. A few HOA members actually came by my farm to apologize for Karen's actions, explaining that she had always been a bit extreme, but that they had no idea she was this crazy. I wasn't looking for an apology, but I'll admit it was hilarious to watch them scramble. The fallout didn't stop at the HOA. Karen's husband had finally had enough. I had heard rumors that their marriage was rocky before, but after getting arrested for illegal dumping, trespassing, and donkey theft, he officially filed for divorce. One of my neighbors, who was friends with someone in their HOA, said that the moment Karen got out on bail, she came home to divorce papers waiting on the kitchen counter. Brutal. From what I gathered, Karen had begged and screamed, but her husband had made up his mind. And since he was the one who actually owned their house, guess who got kicked out? Yep, Karen. Homeless, divorced, and banned from the one place she had spent years controlling. The day Karen finally left town was like watching a villain's final scene in a movie. She had sold her luxury SUV, probably to pay her legal fees, and was packing up the last of her things in a tiny rental car. Neighbors watched from their porches as she furiously stuffed suitcases into the trunk, red-faced and muttering to herself. It was one of the rare moments where the entire HOA community came together to silently enjoy the downfall of the tyrant who had made their lives miserable. As I was out checking my fences that morning, I saw her car slowly drive past my property. For a second, I thought she might try one last act of revenge. But instead, she just glared at me from behind the wheel, face twisted with pure, unfiltered hatred. I gave her a big old friendly wave. She flipped me off, and then she was gone. I thought that was the end of it, but Karen's legacy, or rather her humiliation, was just beginning. The local news story had gained traction online, and soon the internet did what it does best. It turned Karen into a meme. Some genius took a still frame of her being dragged away by the cops and put the caption, "When you commit multiple crimes just to get rid of a donkey." The hashtag Justice for Carl started trending, and people started making t-shirts, stickers, even mugs with Carl's face on them. One particularly hilarious shirt had a cartoon version of Carl with the words, "You mess with the donkey, you get the cuffs." I had nothing to do with the merch, but when a local company offered to donate some of the proceeds to an animal rescue, I gave them my blessing. And Carl? He became a local legend. People would stop by just to take selfies with him. Someone even drew a cartoon version of him wearing sunglasses, and it ended up on a billboard. Carl, 1, Karen, 0. With Karen out of the picture, the HOA suddenly got very, very polite. No more fake complaints, no more power trips. In fact, a few months later, the new HOA president actually reached out to me. We'd love to do a community farm day," he said awkwardly. To rebuild neighborly relationships. I laughed. They didn't want a farm day. They wanted damage control. But I agreed, on one condition: no HOA rules apply to my farm, ever, period. They agreed immediately. So, I threw a huge community event with a petting zoo, free food, and live music. And guess what? People loved it. Even former HOA members admitted that having a farm nearby was actually a blessing. The best part? At the entrance, I had a giant banner that read, "Welcome to the farm, where even the donkeys are nicer than Karen." The HOA president saw it. He sighed. Fair enough. So, after months of harassment, police visits, and absolute insanity, Karen was finally out of my life. Was it exhausting? Yes. Was it worth it to stand my ground? Absolutely. Because at the end of the day, bullies like Karen thrive on control, and when they finally lose that control, they implode. So, to anyone dealing with an HOA Karen in their life, remember, keep records, get cameras, stand your ground, and never, ever let an entitled person steal your donkey. Oh, and one more thing. Justice for Carl. Looking back on everything that happened, I can't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. After months of dealing with Karen's relentless harassment, fake HOA violations, absurd police complaints, and an attempted donkey heist, she finally faced the consequences of her actions. Karen was arrested, publicly humiliated, kicked out of the HOA, and divorced, all in one spectacular downfall. And the best part? She brought it all on herself. I didn't have to manipulate, lie, or play dirty. I simply stood my ground, recorded everything, and let her destroy her own life. It was a masterclass in self-destruction. When I first moved to my farm, I had no idea I'd end up in a battle of wills with an unhinged HOA Karen. I just wanted a peaceful life, some land, a few animals, and the simple joy of hearing my rooster, Cluck Norris, crow in the morning. But some people, like Karen, can't stand the idea of other people being happy on their own terms. She had convinced herself that she was in control of everything around her, even places that were legally outside her HOA's jurisdiction. And when I refused to comply, she lost it. She tried fake letters. She tried false complaints. She tried calling the police on my chickens. She tried stealing Carl the donkey. And when all of that failed, she framed me for a fake health violation, which ultimately got her arrested. That's the thing about Karens of the world. They don't know when to quit. They think they can bully, manipulate, and force their way into getting what they want. But eventually, reality catches up with them. And when it does, it's beautiful to watch. This whole insane experience taught me a few important things about dealing with entitled, overreaching HOA types. Always keep records. Every complaint, every letter, every weird encounter, write it down or record it. It might seem like paranoia at first, but trust me, when the crazy escalates, you'll be glad you have proof. Get security cameras. Karen might have gotten away with trespassing, illegal dumping, and trying to lure my chickens if I didn't have video evidence. Cameras aren't just for security. They're for exposing nonsense. Stand your ground. If you know your rights, don't let some self-important HOA tyrant convince you otherwise. If I had caved into Karen's fake HOA violations early on, I would have lost everything. Sometimes the best revenge is letting people destroy themselves. I never had to lie, manipulate, or retaliate. All I did was document everything and let Karen's entitlement do the rest. Justice always tastes better when served with donkey memes. Seriously, the internet turning this whole thing into justice for Carl was the cherry on top. Even though Karen moved away in disgrace, I still hear rumors about her legendary meltdown. One of my friends recently spotted her in another town, ranting to a cashier about how the world was against her. Apparently, she's still telling people that she was wrongfully arrested because of some redneck donkey farmer. That's me, by the way. And honestly, I wear that title like a badge of honor. I even thought about getting a custom farm sign that says, "Home of the redneck donkey farmer. Beware of karma." Because at the end of the day, that's exactly what happened to Karen. She got exactly what she deserved. I still get messages from people who watched the news story, saw the memes, or stumbled upon the Justice for Carl trend. They love the insanity of it all. How a woman literally ruined her own life trying to shut down a peaceful farm. Some people even ask if they can visit Carl, take pictures with him, or bring him carrots. I say absolutely. Carl deserves to be celebrated. That donkey stood his ground against Karen, outlasted multiple crimes against him, and became a viral sensation. He's a hero in his own right, and now he's living the dream. Now, I know I'm not the only person who has had to deal with a power-hungry HOA Karen, so I want to hear from you. Have you ever dealt with an HOA nightmare? Did they try to fine you for something ridiculous? Did they enforce rules that made no sense? Did they pull a Karen and attempt to steal a donkey? Drop your story in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this absolute roller coaster of drama, justice, and donkey-related insanity, make sure to like this video, because Carl deserves it. Subscribe for more wild stories. Hit that bell so you don't miss any updates. And remember, folks, when life gives you a Karen, get a donkey, set up cameras, and let karma do the rest. At the end of the day, I'm just grateful I can finally enjoy my farm in peace. No more fake HOA violations, no more sudden police visits, no more crazy women screaming about community standards. Just me, my animals, and a glorious, Karen-free life. And if another entitled person ever tries to pull this kind of nonsense again, I'll be ready. Because now I've got experience. And more importantly, I've got Carl. The end. Or at least until the next HOA Karen shows up.